All right, for this video, I'm going to show how I get into some of the tightness of the outer hips. And, this kind of comes if you're doing a lot of like squatting movements, things that where you're coming in deep ends into one leg or the other, taking weight on one foot, balancing on one foot. There's all kinds of reasons you can get tightness. But the tightness occurs basically outer hip, the top part of the glute, maybe moving along that arc of the pelvis that goes to the back and maybe even to the low back a little bit along the piriformis. There's a bunch of muscles in here. I'm not going to bother trying to name them. I'll probably be BSing you, to be honest, because I can't remember them all the time. But you can feel that tension. You can feel some tightness in your low back. And a lot of times you'll feel that extra strain when you're sitting down. And one of the best things that I found to relieve that is basically to use a ball. And I've had this soccer ball forever. It's starting to peel off here. I need to get a new one at some point. But what you do here, and you could use a foam roller. You could use a smaller ball. You might want to go larger, but you need something that's got a bit of firmness to it that I find. And if you got a lot of tightness or a lot of soreness, you might want something a little bit softer, but you need to feel some resistance. And the big thing I like about having the ball here to use, could be a basketball, volleyball, and again, this is a soccer ball right here. But you're basically just rolling over one point. It's easy to adjust and feel where you want the pressure to transfer. So from here, what I usually do is I just basically come up from the floor and I start to move around. So I've got my weight on my hands and on the foot that's on the floor, and I'm just slowly easing into this here. And usually I just go into circles a little bit and just kind of feel out where the muscle's tight. And a lot of the theory here about basically trying to loosen up muscles is you kind of want to massage it crosswise against the grain of the muscle. So if you think of like your quadriceps, like the length of the muscle, the fibers actually go from the hip down toward the knee. If you're trying to massage that out, you want to go side to side. And it's the same sort of thing around here because the muscles start to transfer, say, from the hip joint back to the crease. And so you start going crosswise to that a little bit side to side rather than up and down along the length of the muscle. And you got to feel things out. So you're not going to know exactly where that is, but that's kind of the principle of it. And I usually find just moving into this, I can find spots that are a little bit more sensitive as I go. And if I find a particular sensitive one, I'll just kind of hover on that, maybe just do slight circles, taking it back and forth. And a lot of times you can find if you have a leg lifted here, and especially when you get in the outer hip, maybe bring your foot to the side, maybe just stirring, and here I'm just moving the thigh, the femur, the upper leg, just to really get into that. And you go back and forth between extending and coming back in. There's a bunch of ways to play around. There's no perfect way to do this, keep in mind, but you're applying pressure to the muscle that's not letting go of tension, tensing into that as you press down. And a lot of times that extra tension, that extra pressure helps the muscle relax. Now there's no magic amount of time you do this for. I'm going to take this to the other side here. And there's no perfect spot. Everybody's built a little bit differently, and you're going to find the points that bother you might be much different than the ones that bother me. It really depends on, your habits of movement, the specifics of your anatomy, and that kind of thing. But in principle, I find this is a very good thing to do, especially at the end of the day when I've been moving around or teaching a bunch of classes, just to work some pressure into those muscles. And there's basically almost like pockets of muscle within the gaps between the bones. And those are very hard to reach when you're coming in toward regular stretches. And sometimes just having that direct pressure really helps just to push into the muscle and get that sucker to relax and not tense up so damn much. And I'll take it back and forth. You can go further onto the side of the hip. And a lot of times I find extra sensitive spots around there. And you can feel that right around the head of the femur. And you can even come in toward the hip flexors and roll over. That gets a little bit more complicated, and you definitely have to adjust a little bit and start feeling where you want the weight to be. It's much easier to go through the sides and along the back side of your body to the other side than it is to roll through the front, but that is an option, keep in mind. And this is probably one of the most effective things that I do find for getting those muscles around that area. And I usually find it best if I'm really tight in the middle of the day, I'll do this, but most of the time, I'm doing this at night, within an hour or two before going to bed. And that just helps to let everything relax when I'm not really going to be pushing the muscles too hard or doing any other really strenuous work or anything like that. And then I usually when I wake up the next morning, that tension is pretty much gone. And, and how long it lasts, I don't really know. It really depends on how hard you're working things, how much the tension recurs, what your habits of movement are. So it's not a magic thing necessarily. I do think it does a little bit more than just alleviate symptoms, but nothing's magic, even if it's just placebo. If it works, it works. And I don't really question it past that. But anyway, I do find this quite effective. I do this pretty frequently on various points in my body. And a lot of times it's focused around the hips. Sometimes I'll do the same thing with the upper back and shoulders, and I find this is very useful for that as well. And it's the same kind of thing. Lots of points that are hard to reach, hard to apply pressure to on my own otherwise, and I can just kind of move around back and forth and feel out sort of where the knots and muscles are and just bury into them a little bit, maybe move around. And there's no magic position, but you find where points start to light up, and it's a good way to release a lot of tension that you can't find a lot of relief from otherwise. But anyway, it's a pretty simple thing. I feel a little bit goofy making a tutorial about this, but I do find this very useful, and I come back to it very frequently. So I hope this helps.